Good morning to all of you, and welcome to the United Nations here in New York in the headquarters. This is a wonderful room, and I've spent so many of my awake hours in this room, especially when I was a delegate for India, negotiating all kinds of things. And this has been a very productive room in terms of the outcomes that have come out of this room. So it's a special pleasure to see you all in this wonderful room. I know today is a workshop. We've called it a workshop on business leading the way. As is should be true for all workshops, I hope we can be as interactive as possible. And we strongly discourage long statements, though I'm going to make a long one. And just interrupt whenever, whatever thought comes in your mind. If you want to say something, just ask for the flow. And let's conduct it like an interactive learning session. I think that's the way the penny drops sometimes, and we get to see those insights and issues which have been bothering us and help us conceptualize, because there's a lot of learning to be done in the SDGs. I don't know how many of you were engaged in the conceptualization process, a process which lasted over 4 years in a sense, because it started even before the Rio summit of 2012. I know the business sector was very deeply involved in the conceptualization. I myself was there with the delegations, helping forge this consensus. And I was struck this time because I've been in processes for over 25 years. And I was struck this time at the robust engagement of the business sector. And you created it, you own it. Now's the time to be equally engaged in implementing this agenda. One statistic that always sort of strikes me, I don't know where and how it came out, but 80% of the contribution to the SDGs and their attainment by 2030 will have to come from the business sector. And that's why I say that you conceptualized it. You were very much at the heart of conceptualizing it, and it's very important that you be fully engaged in the realization of this agenda for 2030. It's not an agenda which is owned by governments. It is owned by everyone. And unless we are going to work together to realize it, we'll leave a terrible world by 2030 for our children, for future generations. So everything you think through in getting your particular sectors, your particular industries engaged is going to be extremely important. But before I go into some of the substance of what I think should be the nature of engagement in this, I just wanted to thank Paloma and the SDG Fund, as also EcoVadis, for their engagement in this. We are doing it in the wings of the high-level political forum. It's a forum which is now increasingly focusing on implementation, and I think it's very opportune that all of you are here to talk about how you can contribute to the implementation of this agenda, to interact with governments, of course, who are here in strength, and they'll be here at the ministerial level on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday next week, but also with academia, with civil society, to show that, look, business engagement is full and sincere. It's the old relations, I think, dissipated with the establishment of the SDG agenda. Everyone accepted the full throated participation of the business sector. There was no resistance in the room to the engagement of the business sector. And I've seen this change dramatically over the past 2.5 decades, where business was sometimes treated as being on the other side. But that has changed completely. And that's something which enthuses me. And to see the response of business, I live in Geneva. I have seen the engagement of the World Economic Forum, the WBCSD, and over here of the ICC, the kind of apex bodies which get business together. But to see you all here, to see EcoVadis, and I was the meeting EcoVadis had in Paris with a special focus on supply chain, that was really very encouraging to see the robust engagement. Now let me see what the basic problem is and articulate it the best I can. I think often I've heard the point of view from business that the language of the United Nations is a world apart from the language of business. And how do we somehow get these two languages epitomizes the way we think and do our work? So how do we get a closer concordance between the way business thinks and works, and the way the UN comes up with its hoary political pronouncements, sometimes very difficult to translate into the language of business. So how do we first bridge that divide? How do we get to speak a common language? Because after all, we are working not only for the types of things business works for, but of course cognizant of the needs and the urgency that is spelled out in the agenda to end poverty in all its forms everywhere, and do this along a sustainable development pathway so that you leave a more equal world, a more prosperous world, and a world without poverty by 2030. So these are big things, and without this 80% engagement, we are not going to get there. I thought of this issue, and I thought of what is the best organizing principle to get businesses engaged in the SDGs. Clearly, you are engaged in non-financial reporting of various forms. It sometimes takes the form of CSR, which, the corporate social responsibility and this corporate sustainable responsibility. But I think what business really needs to think now is corporate sustainable development goals responsibility, which is much broader than the types of issues that are covered in, for example, the Global Compact or in the corporate social responsibility. It's much more than the issue of rights and decent work and respect for various other types of things which are enshrined in corporate sustainability reporting. It has to be a kind of organizing principle which gets all the goals and targets aligned to the work that you do. Now, clearly, one can't talk of the business sector as a generic entity. There is no such thing when it comes to looking at the SDGs. The type of sector, is it manufacturing, is it services, is it finance? What is the kind of engagement? Where, for example, are supply chains relevant? What does greening of finance mean? How does sustainability and SDG responsibility apply to different types of business and activities? Clearly, it's not something which is only for Fortune 500 companies or big business. It applies to the millions of small businesses, of medium-sized businesses, because unless all those contribute, you won't add up to 80%. And how do we get to engage many of the very small entities, particularly in the developing world? There's a large number of those engaged in the informal sectors. How can they also be a part of this wonderful experiment of creating a sustainable world by 2030? So if you look at non-financial reporting, and if you look at ways in which that non-financial reporting can be made more comprehensive and relevant to the type of sector that you're engaged in your activities, I don't think we'll get to a systematic approach towards achieving the SDGs. Now, it's not just a question of ticking off boxes, of saying that, okay, you've managed to reduce GHG emissions, or you've managed to green your businesses, or you have greener supply chain, or you have better supply chain management. It's much more about looking at every aspect of your activities and to see how those are contributing. All are not relevant, of course. All the goals and targets and indicators are not relevant. But in your activities, can you pick out those goals, those targets, and now the indicators which are most pertinent and relevant to your sphere of activity? So I think the best organizing principle on which businesses should be working is to pick out from the SDGs, convert it into a language that you understand, and to try and see if you can convert that into a learning thing for your own business. Who are the people in your business who need to learn about this? Is it the CEOs? Is it senior level management? Has it to be the rank and file? Has it to filter down in your entire operations? Does it have to be relevant to for those of you who are multinationals, who have activities outside? How do you get this message of learning specific to your business in a language which is understood by the people who are working for you? I'm not saying you substitute this for financial reporting. Financial reporting and the type of periodicity, the frequency, 3 months, 4 months, whatever you have in your business is very important for you, for your stakeholders, for the continued confidence in your business. But can you look at a certain periodicity of non-financial reporting? Could be once a year, could be once in 18 months, which looks at the pertinent goals and targets which are relevant to your particular industry or sector or business, and to see how to convert that into a learning and training exercise for the people who work for you, from your suppliers, from the whole chain of people who are engaged in your business. So I think that might be a good way to think through how business can contribute to the achievement of the SDGs by a judicious mix of your financial reporting, and by deciding voluntarily on the basis of the nature of your business some kind of system of non-financial reporting. This is something I've been thinking, and we are in an organization called the UN Institute of Training and Research. I'm very keen, with the help of the SDG Fund and the other apex bodies, to try and create a training module for businesses, depending on the kind of sector you're in, where we can help you understand how the SDGs and the goals and targets and indicators can be converted into learning and capacity building for your particular organizations. Without that, I think it will be very difficult to get mindset changes, to get businesses and your own operations to perform differently. So I just wanted to share this thought and see whether some of this resonates with you, whether you feel this is going to be very difficult. And so during the course of today, I think you have a day-long series of activities in this workshop. I hope you'll be able to engage, address some of the issues that I raise, and there's so many other issues which I have not raised, but I think all that will be the way in which you can make best use of the day. And I hope what you learn and what you take back to your respective businesses, and those you can convince and persuade in your own systems of management and hierarchy, that this is the wave of the future, and we better be in tune with this wave, otherwise we will all suffer, not only as a business, but also as a collective responsibility of business to society and to our citizens. So let me stop there and thank you all. Please feel free, if you want, to ask me any questions now or later. I'll be around with you till at least 10:30. And I wish you all have a wonderful day, a productive day, and you feel enriched by being in the UN and by listening to people who talk a different language sometimes, but who want to try and get you into the mainstream of these activities for a better world for all of us. So thank you very much. It's a great pleasure now for me to give the floor to our co-host, Paloma Duran, a former Spanish diplomat who is now in charge of the SDG Fund. So Paloma.
Thank you, Nikhil. As Nikhil already mentioned, this room also has a lot of memories for me, because I remember that even we spent here 27 hours without a stop negotiating the document related to social development. So it was a very interesting process, but anyway, it's not the theme for the event today. So thank you so much. Thank you to all of you for being here. And thank you also to UNITAR, the Department of Economic and Social Affairs of the UN, DESA. And thank you also, EcoBuddies, for the organization of this event that I think that from my point of view is a very important one. I'm really glad, especially for two reasons. First, because the partners that we have here, and second, because the specific focus on private sector. Related to the partners, I wanted just to use this chance to publicly recognize my really gratitude to Patricia Chavez from DESA, who really was the origin of the whole thing, with Marco Suazo, the director of UNITAR office here in New York. I'm really glad that they decided to work with us and also with EcoBuddies on this idea. I'm really especially grateful because with UNITAR, and thank you to the support of Marco, of course of Nikhil from Geneva, we organized together the first online course on business and SDGs. So I think that it was very helpful, especially for the delegates of different member states working here in the UN. and also for other people that really would like to use the information that we add in the course. But also, as I mentioned, I'm especially glad really to be here with the private sector, especially because the fund where I'm working, the SDG fund, the Sustainable Development Goals Fund, is an entity that was created just when the agenda of the UN was approved, the Agenda 2030 for the new goals. And you know, one of the things that we try to do, we are working like in two tracks. We are trying to implement programs in the field where we are trying to engage the private sector, but at the same time, the agenda, as you know, that propose universal targets for everyone, not only for the governments, also propose to have actors that traditionally didn't work with the UN in the agenda. And I mean, one of our main efforts in the fund was to see how can we engage really, in this particular case, the private sector. That's the reason because, I mean, as Nikhil mentioned, sometimes, of course, the language is different, the approach is different, and, you know, we are talking about a public approach, the UN, because we are talking about governments. The UN really is the composition of different member states, and then at the same time, private sector. So the language is different, the approach is different, the calendars are different, the monitoring and reporting are different, so it's a real challenge. But we decided to learn from the private sector. You know that here in the UN sometimes we have, now that nobody here is listening to me, I can say that, but you know, sometimes it's very easy to prepare a report and to explain to the private sector what the private sector has to do. So we wanted really to hear the voices of the private sector to see where are the challenges and obstacles that you think you have to work with us, because at the end, the goal is not the partnership. The goal is to improve the life of the people in the field. And in order to do so, let's see how can we work together. So we decided in the SDG Fund to create a very small group with companies from all over the world, trying to listen to them and to use the expertise. The first question was, how much is the fee? And you say, no, I don't need the fee. What I need is your expertise, your advice, and your support. Because the idea is, of course, we need the private sector as a donor, but the main thing is to have the private sector as an actor. And it means that we need to change many things in the house, and also that the private sector need probably to reply to some challenges in order to work together. So in order to do so, and to listen really to the private sector, because one of the things is that we are talking about the private sector, like if the private sector is only one thing, but the private sector means many different things. And in fact, we have last year some workshops in the 5 regions of the UN, and what happened is that the challenges in Africa are completely different than the challenges in the US. And the challenges in the companies working on environment are completely different than the challenges for companies working on food. And, you know, I mean, we are talking about the private sector, like many people talk about the UN, like if we are talking about 2 actors, but we have many challenges there. So I think that with the private sector advisory group that we created at the global level, and as I mentioned, we have companies from the 5 regions, we have 13 companies there. You can get the whole information in our webpage. There is no secret about that. You can find everything there. But we decided to create a first tool in order to listen to the companies, where are the obstacles that you have. We prepared this first tool with the companies and with the support of Harvard University through the specific unit that they have on social responsibility. And it was really very useful. We have here Tony Cole, who is the CEO and co-founder of Sahara Group in Nigeria, and the company is one of the members that we have in the advisory group. And you know, the first tool was very useful. The second one was about universality, meaning that the private sector is not the same in every place, and the challenges in Europe, in Africa, in Latin America, in Asia, or in the US are completely different. So in the second tool, we try to see where are the challenges in every region, where are the challenges in every goal, because, you know, it's not easy to ask to the private sector some changes and passing from the traditional idea of philanthropy and social responsibility programs to the idea that if we want the private sector as an actor, we need that the private sector integrate the SDGs in the core business of the company. So the approach is completely different, and we need really to work with the private sector in order to support this transitional process, but at the same time, I would like also to listen from the private sector what the UN maybe can change in order to work together. Because as I repeat, the idea is not only the partnership, which is wonderful, because we need all the partners together. The goal is really to improve the life of the people that we can improve. And if we do it together, it's going to be easier. So in order to do so, we are now this year preparing the third report, which is based on peace and business, thinking mainly in post-conflict situations where really the private sector needs very strong institutions, but also the society needs a very strong private sector there. So in November, all of you are invited to participate in the launching of the report, the 3rd of November here in New York. But in any case, what I wanted just also to say is that after this whole process on, if you like, advocacy, knowledge together, a dialogue with the private sector, some months ago, we did the kickoff of the first program where we have the private sector co-designing the program with us and co-implementing the program with us. The program, which is called Food Africa, is going to be implemented in Nigeria with the support of Sahara Group, in this case, from the side of the private sector, but also we have there 3 agencies of the UN, FAO, ILO, and the International Trade Center, and also we are going to work with the local government. So we put all the actors together, which is one of the things that we try to do in the SDG Fund. Especially, we don't want to complicate the life of anyone. On the contrary, we would like to use the expertise and the knowledge from all the agencies of the UN working together, and also from the private sector and from the local government, also to approach to development and the new goals in a little bit different approach, meaning that we would like really to change this idea of development in a so-called, if I may say so, patronizing approach, saying, I'm going to give you the money and I'm going to tell you what do you have to do. So we would like really to ensure the national ownership of the programs. We wanted really to ensure that the country and the local actors are going to prepare the priorities for their people and not from here. And, we are trying to do so also introducing a new methodology for the programs that we are implementing with the private sector, which is the matching funds. If I give you $1 for this project, you are going to find an additional $1 from the local actors. And the idea, I repeat, is not just to complicate the life of anyone. The idea is to ensure that we are facilitating the creation of a local network, that if we, as the UN, finish with the program, the local network is there, and they are going to be the leaders for the future programs and for the sustainability of the programs. That is probably one of the main challenges that we have when we talk about development. So I think that, we are doing a very interesting work with the private sector, but I repeat, if the private sector wants to be a donor, it will be wonderful, but I think that we need to go a little bit farther and try to engage the private sector also as an actor. It's not easy. We spent a year with the process to design the specific project to be implemented, but I have to say that it was a very positive experience. I think that, maybe, I don't know if maybe Sahara Group will have the chance to say something later on. But what I wanted to underline here is that we, the UN, we need the private sector, but also we need the private sector as an actor, not only as a donor. And it means that the UN, we need to change in some way the protocols and the procedures in order to do so, but the private sector also need to do this exercise and change from the traditional idea of just philanthropy, which is wonderful, and the companies that really prefer to do that is fine. But I think that now the challenge is to move to the other challenge, which is to integrate the SDGs in the core business of the companies. But I repeat with the idea that the goal is to improve the life of the people. So thank you so much, and I hope really that the day will be a very useful day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paloma. Now, before we start the first training session, I thought if there were some questions for Paloma and me, we can spend 4 or 5 minutes in addressing those. But there's one thought that I wanted to also share with you, that of course business works in a national, economic, political, social, regulatory environment, and it's easy to talk about the responsibilities of business, but we have stressed, at least through the conceptualization phase, the need for effective multi-stakeholder engagement in the formulation of the regulatory environment, in the shaping of the national political, social, economic environment, not only at a big national level, but more crucially at local and especially the city levels. So the idea is also that we will work with governments, we will work with academia, we'll work with civil society to help, and of course with business, to create effective multi-stakeholder processes at the national and local level. You know, if we look at all the success stories, particularly in the environmental area, and I'm familiar with Japan, and I look at their cities, very polluted industrial cities 30 years ago. Kawasaki is one city I was taken to, and that was a very polluted city 30 years ago. But they've made such a dramatic transition to sustainability and sustainable city. And everyone in Kawasaki says that that worked only because they managed to engage the business sector and the local authorities and academia in much more effective ways, so that they jointly did a lot in determining this regulatory and political social environment. So I think we have to equally work with governments and the other partners and create these multi-stakeholder mechanisms, especially at the city level, I feel increasingly, where you can help shape the formulation of policies so that everyone is working together for creation of the world we want by 2030. But this is the only thought I wanted to share. I realize that business also needs these partnerships. You can't do it alone. And I just wanted to say that while we talk to you, we are also talking to the others in helping shape the creation of these effective mechanisms which will operate at country level in particular. Is there any question or comment people want to make now? Please.
I'm Gada Hamouda, Chief Marketing and Sustainability Officer of Kala Holdings, an Egypt-based company that does business in East Africa. And I think, on one hand, we witness an energy in the ecosystem around the whole area of sustainability and the importance of inclusive growth and inclusive economies. And I think I come from a region that has witnessed terrorism and has witnessed a lot of negativity that has created unstable or unstable environments for business. And I do see, we live it, businesses are starting to realize if they're not just aware of the importance of sustainability, they're interested, they want to actually take part in creating these more stable, sustainable economies and inclusive economies. The question is no longer about why should I do it, I think it's more about how do I do it and how do I participate. And I think one of the things that I still find a struggle with, despite the fact that there are converts, is we don't speak in the language of business yet. Businesses think risk and reward. I mean, we are going through difficult economies, and no one can afford what used to be a luxury of philanthropy to now what they're convinced about as being responsibly contributing and investing to create the right environment and to thrive. But risk and reward. And the question is, how do we translate what we refer to as the Sustainable Development Goals, which are really national priorities and regional priorities and global priorities. How do you translate those into business opportunities? How do you translate those to what it means for business? Why is it good for business? And I think this is part of hopefully what I'm coming here for, to try to discuss and arrive at. And I think it's looking at what current existing businesses or new businesses can do to benefit if they actually participate and start to take on that sustainable development goals, or some of them that are relevant to their business, and what risks are they avoiding or challenges that are being addressed if, in fact, they're part of that ecosystem that makes it happen. So, thank you.
To say something, Paloma?
I mean, I think that, it's a very pertinent question, because the point is, how can we translate that into action? I think that we are using a tool which is called Compass in order to see first how to integrate the SDGs in the work that we are doing in my company. For instance, last year we have one of the companies in our advisory group working really very hard, but trying to see how can we really integrate the SDGs in our work. It's a very big company, and they realize that in the value chain, they have many companies in Asia, and they realize that in some of the factories in the whole value chain, which is a very long one, workers didn't have funds in the factories. So the first priority to integrate the goals in the company was really to put funds in all the factories. This is apparently a very small thing, but the translation of that is that the workers went to work in a completely different setting, and they are much more productive, if I can say so, just because they have a better environment. This is a very small thing, but I think that in the business, I'm not working in the business side, but my experience with the private sector is that the first point is to see what are the activities and the things that we are doing in the company that we can translate it into the setting of the Sustainable Development Goals, because there are many companies doing many things, even if they don't realize that they are implementing the agenda. For instance, on gender issues, on environmental issues, on access to water, on decent jobs, in all the goals. So I think that the first thing is try to use the template of the SDGs and to translate the activities that the company is already doing and implementing. And then the second one is really how I would like to see in 10 years or in 20 years my company. This is the time when I think that we need to use Compass in order to see in the company, first of all, how will be our decision? Are we going to work for philanthropy? Are we going to work for social responsibility, or are we going to change a little bit and to integrate the SDGs in the company? I think that the most important thing from my point of view is really to have the CEO of the company, not only the social responsibility side, but also the financial side of the company, making the decision about that. But I'm very ambitious saying this in the presence of all the people working in the private sector, being, in my case, working in the public sector. So, probably other people can reply to you better, but I can share with you the experience that we have with the private sector advisory group.
I just wanted to add that I think that was a great question. But sometimes when we look at the SDGs, we don't look so closely, especially in this community who are present in this room, at SDG 16. Now, this is the first time in UN legislative history, as I know it, apart from the UN Charter itself, where issues of peaceful and just societies are woven into the SDGs. And critically, in many of these countries which are afflicted by upheaval, civil strife, ethnic conflict, and so on, the creation of peaceful and just societies, of course, is dependent on the attainment of all the SDGs, but more directly, it's on things like the safety sector reform, the kind of policing, the judiciary, and so on. So these are also very important. And how can business contribute and work with government in that kind of thing? Now, these areas have generally been in the very strict remit of governments. And could business, for example, contribute to the sort of sectoral reforms required for the police, judiciary, to create the kind of stability in which businesses can thrive? So these are difficult questions, but they are captured in the SDGs. And it's really expanding the horizon of how business think through many of these issues and how they can contribute in partnerships with so many other actors in creating the societies we want, where stability and prosperity will come as a concomitant to the kind of actions that are taken by a myriad of actors. Is there anything else, or should we now? Yes, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Seth. I'm representative of Belgium here, and I'm working for a Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Development Cooperation who's all in favor of working with the private sector, both abroad and in our own country when it comes to bringing the SDGs forward, about transforming these billions in trillions and all that. Absolutely, no doubt. At the same time, I think what we've all subscribed to with Agenda 2030 is a universal agenda where policy coherence is really a cornerstone idea. Few mentions in the agenda on policy coherence. And indeed, when we're moving from the MDG to the SDG era, as somebody yesterday said, woman washing is kind of a practice we might want to avoid in the name of policy coherence, and the good old greenwashing is still alive and kicking as well. And just as we as a country are preparing a national voluntary review and see no need to entertain, for instance, a tobacco company that would tell us how well it is faring in terms of labor standards protection, we also have a difficulty to see how an oil and gas company can be presented as a poster boy for the SDG fund. Since some tokenistic activity when it comes to food security in a philanthropical way can never, ever make up for the fact that the core activity of such a company is to continue against all odds extracting and burning fossil fuels, which flies in the face of SDGs 7, 13, 12, and many more. So, I repeat my point that I made a few days earlier when that poster boy was already presented. That is, the SDG fund, if it continues this way, is risking huge reputational damage. And so does the EU, which is funding this. And I'm saying this as a European taxpayer. And so are all the UN organizations that commit to the activities on that specific activity with that specific company. And I feel compelled to make that known in my country with stakeholders, with my government, and with those UN organizations. There is a big misunderstanding about the concept of leaving no one behind. Leaving no one behind is a rights-based perspective and is about the beneficiaries of Agenda 2030. It does not mean that we have to co-opt all the harmful practices of yesteryear when we are now implementing a universal sustainable development agenda. Thank you very much. I just wanted to make that point very straight from the outset because it's a very fundamental one. Thank you.
I have some thoughts on that too, but I think the SDG fund representative is probably better placed to respond directly to you.
For sure. I think that we need to move to the next session, but I wanted only to explain for also your reference that, I mean, every unit in the UN, in order to work with the private sector, has to pass a very serious due diligence process. Without the due diligence process, we never work with any company. It's not only a rule for the SDG fund, it's the rule that we need in all our agencies, in all the UN agencies. We need that all the companies working with us pass the due diligence process. So, of course, all the entities that we have now working with us pass this due diligence process. Yes, also, but in any case, we can talk later on. Thank you.
Now, I just wanted to quickly say one thing, because a similar issue arose when a program was being launched on road safety. And an alcohol company offered to contribute to developing a program which will help in the area of preventing road deaths and injuries. Now the question arose that is this morally defensible that an alcohol company, but then it struck me that it's not drinking of alcohol which is wrong, it's excessive blood alcohol content in the blood of drivers which is the problem. And if a company which is responsible, a company, is willing to help in reducing road accidents and deaths and injuries by contributing to a learning process where different people involved in the issue of road safety, the police and breath analyzing, or young people who drive without helmets, I don't know, the sort of gray area in this becomes quite large. But let's not, I think at this time, get into this kind of discussion because we have a full day of this training session. And I really would like to invite Alison Taylor, who's moderating the next training session, Gary Cohen, Tamer Mosalam, and Kip Cleverley to come up here and start the next session.
Wait, you're good. You're good.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to introduce the first panel, which is entitled Experiences in Implementing and Reporting on the SDGs by Multinational Organizations. And I think I can immediately say we're going to pick up on a lot of the very excellent points raised in our introductory remarks, particularly the comment that there's no such thing as the generic business sector, and then this really excellent question here about how you translate these goals, which were not designed exclusively with the private sector in mind, into business opportunities rather than philanthropic efforts. So we have three panelists this morning. We have Gary Cohen, who is Executive Vice President of Global Health and Development at Becton Dickinson. We have Tamer Mosalam, who is SVP of PepsiCo in Egypt. And we have Kip Cleverley, who is Vice President Global Sustainability at International Flavors and Fragrances. So already we are going to be able to provide a cross-sector perspective and really explore this question of how you go about actually making this happen within a company. So I'm not going to talk anymore. I'm going to ask each of the panelists to introduce themselves, talk briefly about their role as it relates to the SDGs, and then answer the question, how did you go about developing your SDG strategy, and how was this shaped by your business model? So let's start with Gary.
And just one clarification, do you want us to introduce ourselves and then
Yes,
make our
please.
statement? Okay, perfect. So good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here, and I privately complimented our opening session because I thought that the comments were so very relevant given how closely I'm working in this space. So by way of introduction, so my name is Gary Cohen. I'm Executive Vice President and President of Global Health and Development for Becton Dickinson, which is a 120-year-old, large, it'll be about 65,000 people globally, very global company. I've been there 34 years, so I'm a long-term veteran. I operate at a very senior level of the company as an executive officer. I don't have direct responsibility for sustainability, interestingly. What I do, and it's very much a bespoke job that I created within the company, is align our activities with major issues and problems that need to be solved in the world, which aligns very well with the Sustainable Development Goals. I also serve in a number of capacities that support the public sector, on the board of UNICEF USA, on the board of the CDC Foundation, co-chair of GBC Health, which is a coalition of companies working on global health. And I'll touch upon a few of those things as I talk through my hopefully brief remarks. So first, I just want to say that we're doing the things that you would expect. You know, I had a sense maybe in this group there would be people who would have a little bit of an ESG type of orientation. I'm not going to spend environmental and societal and governance goals, environmental sustainability and governance goals. And, you know, we certainly engage in that, and we set a series of goals and targets that we're achieving. One was increasing our reliance on renewable energy, and we've gotten up to 98% use of renewable energy in the U.S., but I'm not really here to talk about that. I'm much more here to talk about how we align our core business activities around the SDGs in areas where we really believe we have the ability to have substantial impact. And it was mentioned in the opening comments about sort of the use of philanthropy versus CSR in other areas. We actually deploy very intentionally 4 different methods for positive social impact that collectively represent our corporate social innovation strategy. The first is philanthropy, because that remains important. Some people will say that's becoming obsolete. It's not. It remains important. CSR is where we use our core competencies to have beneficial impact on society in a way that's not directly related to commercial outcomes, and I'll describe some of the ways we do that. A third way is through our policy and advocacy activities, where we try to use our influence to align national policies, international guidelines around areas that are beneficial for society. And the fourth is a terminology shared value creation, which is where we engage directly into our business models initiatives that are specifically designed to address unmet societal needs. One thing I'll say, we've mapped our business strategies to all of the SDGs, and we found relevance in 15 of the 17 goals. You certainly can't see it from here, but this was a mapping exercise that we engaged in, which was more of the general mapping. And then we get very deep. We've had, even around the time the SDGs were first launched, we had participated in some of the private sector input of the SDGs, and this is quite a long document, very specifically laying out where our work is relevant to the SDGs and where we're aligning. And as you might expect, BD is a medical technology company, so SDG 3 is the one where we have the greatest opportunity for impact. And as we've looked at the SDG targets, just about every SDG target we have direct impact on. I'm going to read these off just so you have a sense of the areas that we're working on. But 3.1 is reducing maternal mortality. 3.2, ending preventable deaths of newborns. 3.3 is HIV, TB and malaria, infectious diseases. 3.4 is non-communicable diseases. 3.7 is sexual reproductive health services. 3.8, universal access to health services. 3.9, hazardous chemicals. 3B, supporting research and development of new vaccines and medicines. I won't read the rest, but these are all areas that we're okay, I'll take your advice. Thank you for the advice. But these are areas that we're very deeply engaged in. I'm going to provide a few examples. So regarding strengthening of health systems and supporting universal health access, we've been partnering now for 10 years with the U.S. government through the CDC and PEPFAR to strengthen health systems and laboratory systems in 5 countries in sub-Saharan Africa and in India. And this work has matured enough that we can directly report the outcomes which have been reported in the Journal of Infectious Diseases on things like reducing the turnaround time for tuberculosis testing from 3 weeks to 3 days, increasing the diagnosis of people with multiple drug-resistant TB, which is an extreme threat to the world. That would be an example of how we put that type of work into operations. And that's done hand in hand between the CDC and BD people working in the field in laboratories. And it's an example of corporate social responsibility. It's not directly linked to our commercial practice, but it's using the institutional knowledge of our company. Another example is we're collaborating with the Gates Foundation, with the Children's Investment Fund, and other private sector partners like Pfizer to substantially increase access to injectable contraceptive for women and girls so they can control their fertility. Anyone who works in this space knows how important fertility control, family planning, and reproductive health is, and what this unique combination does, including a unique device that allows for self-administration, is it puts women and girls in control of their fertility. And that has multiple benefits. And that's, again, a cross-sector collaboration. We've also been working for a number of years now on reducing maternal and newborn mortality, and this was at the request of the World Health Organization to develop innovations to address both maternal and newborn mortality during childbirth. We're about 5 years working on new innovations. We've invested already over $20 million in this, and it was outside of our normal field of business. And we specifically worked on it because we knew at the close of the MDG period that among the 3 health-related MDG goals, deaths of mothers and newborns lagged progress on other MDGs. So we got involved in areas where our core competencies were relevant and where we could innovate, but were beyond the fields that we had worked in previously. And in my view, that is an example of how you align business activity to achieve societal goals, as opposed to doing it the other way around, trying to interpret societal goals that in a way that aligns to the priorities of the business. As we did this work, and personally as I was engaged heavily in the HIV and AIDS response in the prior decade, we kind of spilled over into working on human rights issues, and this speaks to the point about SDG 16, just peaceful societies. One of the things that I became personally aware of was that HIV prevalence rates among girls and young women in high prevalence countries were 3 to 4 times higher than among boys and young men. So among youth, female youth represented 66 to 75% of HIV prevalence in high prevalence countries, and that clearly reflected a societal discontinuity. The way girls and women are treated in society was leading to higher infection rates. And that wasn't a medical issue, it was a social justice issue. And I personally worked in 2007, 2008 to try to get mobilization around that because I noticed this discontinuity and felt something had to be done. But there was really nothing focused on sexual violence against girls specifically. So I personally founded a partnership called Together for Girls, which we launched in 2009, includes 5 UN agencies led by UNICEF, U.S. government, the Canadian government, and we implement methodologies working under the auspices of national governments to address sexual violence against girls. And that work has expanded to 23 countries in Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and Central America over a period of 8 years. And it's a very defined methodology how we go about doing this, starting with national house-to-house surveys, interviewing children age 13, young adults age 24 about their experiences with violence, and particularly sexual violence. So why is this relevant? Because sexual violence against girls underpins many of the most deeply embedded health problems that exist, particularly in developing and emerging countries. Infectious disease spread, teenage pregnancy, which leads to maternal mortality, children born into poverty, girls dropping out of school, discontinuing their education, which also undermines the development of society. So why would I bring this up in this context? It was an outgrowth of the company engaging deeply in addressing societal issues in areas where we have depth of expertise. And then as a result of that, determining what other underlying issues had to be dealt with in order to achieve the type of health goals that we were seeking to address. You know, beyond that, in our core business model, we characterize shared value creation as commercial initiatives that are pursued because of an unmet societal need. So the work we're doing on maternal newborn mortality, the work we're doing on malaria, HIV, we're investing substantially through our commercial operations and also through how we deploy our workforces globally to address those needs. And when we do that work, we do it always through cross-sector collaboration. If there's one area we've gained deep experience, it's working across sectors. And all the points this morning about language resonated because I do a lot of work here in the UN. I carry a UN pass, which is not typical for someone working in the private sector. But it took months just to understand the language differences. I felt as though if you take a UN person and put them in a business meeting, they won't know what anyone's talking about, and you take a business person, put them in a UN meeting. But over time, you do learn, it's like a translator. You need somebody sitting in the booth there with the headphones to understand what people are saying. But once you overcome that, what you find is a lot of common ground. And the underlying basis of collaboration is building mutual trust and alignment of underlying motives. And what we find in cross-sector collaboration that's particularly important is if your motives are aligned, if you're working towards the same purpose and you don't have ulterior motives and everything is transparent about what you're trying to accomplish and you build trust, then you can really be successful. Cross-sector collaboration is not necessarily easy to do. Let me leave it at that for now and we'll come back with some questions later.
Thank you very much. Lots of follow-up questions immediately, but I would like to hand over to Tamer next. I'll just remind you of the question. Please talk briefly about your role as it relates to the SDGs, and then speak to us about how Pepsi in Egypt went about developing your SDG strategy, and how was this shaped by your business model?
I can't actually, I will not compete with the 34 years old 34 experience. I've been working for PepsiCo for 15 years, and I think that I have done an achievement. So you're really inspiring everyone in the room. My name is Tamer Mosalam. I'm the Vice President for the food operation for Egypt, Jordan, and the North African markets. I've been working for PepsiCo for 15 years now. Actually, I'm a proud employee. I was thinking while you're mentioning the 30-something years in the same company that I always tell my kids that I would like to retire in PepsiCo. So that will tell you how proud we are with the company, not only from a business achievement point of view and the performance, but also the continuous improvement that happens within the organization to really make the change and talk the same language as Nikhil was mentioning, that probably the UN goals are talking in a different direction than probably a businessman will think. So I've seen that change happening in PepsiCo in the past 10 years, how we successfully led the sustainability journey over time. And not only that, but the educational that we have done into within the organization to engage everyone and make sure that it's a one task that we look at day in, day out, and it's one of our KPIs that we'll look at. Today is a very special day for me personally because the first time I entered to the United Nations building, I was something like 23 years old. I came as part of the Egyptian delegation with the Minister of Population at that time in '94. Just to present Egypt as a destination for the General Assembly to vote for, to host the population conference at that time. So I was too young. It took me 23, 24 years old to come back, but today is not a pleasure, it's an honor to get again into the building and be part of that interesting topic, and of course be with such a great crowd. Let me tell you a little bit about what we're trying to do in PepsiCo. I think in October 2016, we have announced our new PWP goals, very ambitious goals that has been announced by our CEO, and it has been adapted and cascaded to all the global markets that we are operating in. Those goals were basically put in order to accelerate and foster the business growth across the world, but not only that, in order to meet the challenging needs of the consumers and the societal changes that happening around the world as well. The world is not becoming easier, it's becoming complicated, especially in the area that I'm come from. Middle East is full of action. Every day you hear something new. Every country has its own challenging days and moments. However, that puts a pressure on all the global companies that operating in such markets like ours. And actually, one thing that we wanted to think of while putting those new challenging PWP goals is how to create a new relationship between the consumer and the food, and how to help the company thinks of transforming our portfolio to healthier, to make sure that the consumer will make the right choices in the future. And of course, we were inspired by the SDGs by the United Nations. And this is something that we have put into consideration. We studied that across all the markets. We've reviewed our initiatives in the past 10 years, and we have seen the progress that we've made in some areas and where we really need to accelerate the work that we need to do. So, for example, the food health as one of the goals for the United Nations that will come in our aspiration to transform our portfolio. So get into new businesses, get into new categories, and of course work on initiatives that make our products healthier, whether it's food or beverage. The second thing is how really to sustain the business growth, and that has a lot to do with the investments that we put into new markets and mature markets as well within the globe. And of course, how to create new jobs as we invest those dollars into every market. And the water sustainability comes as a big thing that we really work on. And I'm going to tell you in a bit a couple of facts when we talk about specifically about Egypt, how we could have done better and what we're doing in order really to continue developing that perspective for the future. While the PWP are active and really part of our culture globally, Egypt is one great country where you have the population, you have the potential. It has its own challenging. However, Egypt considered to be the second largest market for PepsiCo in the Middle East after Saudi Arabia. However, it beats Saudi when it comes to population and potentiality. And of course, the need of putting a lot of sustainability projects into action that helps the country and helps the consumer and helps the people, and of course the private sector has a great role to play versus the governmental organization, if you wish to say. While we witness a lot of instability in the economy and in the political scene, however, we've been very committed to Egypt. So we've been operating in Egypt for the past 70 years. We basically own a business that comes to $1.5 billion turnover. That came to the 50% of that after the devaluation. So we have the burden now to really grow that business faster than what we used to perform in the past 5 years. However, that's a 10 manufacturing facility, almost 18,000 people working for PepsiCo, 55,000 jobs. And also we have a lot of 3 companies, two owned operation by PepsiCo and 1 joint venture, which basically takes PepsiCo business to a new heights, where we got into a real joint venture with a great giant of dairy and juice business. And that is a great opportunity for us to transform our portfolio in a market like Egypt faster than what we were planning for. And actually, talking specifically about Egypt, I would say that there is 3 main initiatives that we have been working on in the past 10 years, which I personally very proud of. One of them is a program called Tumuh. Tumuh means ambitious in English. It's the word in Arabic, Tumuh, which an initiative that we've worked with on with the World Food Organization to provide better education for the youth in a place called Upper Egypt. Upper Egypt is the southern part of the country, very poor. Almost 50 to 60% of the population live under the poverty line, and therefore the parents don't really send their kids to school. Once they grow up like 6, 7 years old, they take them to the field, they take them to do small jobs so they can participate into the cost of living. So we've came in with a great initiative to provide the parents or the families with food necessities every month, but the condition is they have to send their kids to schools. And I had the pleasure with Shireen, the head of our internal communication and sustainability programs in Egypt, to meet those kids a couple of days ago in our head office in Cairo. And it was great to see the company employees has a bit of tears in their eyes looking into those kids, 10, 11, 12 years old. And they're very proud kids. They're very happy that they had the opportunity to go to schools. And I have seen the teachers, great women that have take the responsibility to educate those kids in one of the classrooms. And one of the teachers was telling me that they have to walk something like 2-3 kilometers every day in order to get to a small class in a small village in order to get into those 20-25 kids and give them the lesson of the day. So that's one great initiative that we've been doing for the past 10 years. We've been responsible to graduate something like 30 to 40,000 kids out of the different villages across that geographical area in Egypt. Second initiative is the Dawri al-Madaris. It's the football schools league that we have created out of scratch in Egypt. We've supported both education, the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Youth and Sports in order to create that activity for the 14, 15 years old kids getting educated in the governmental school. That program, the results of it over 10 years, that now we've sponsored 9 of the 12 players who plays for the national team in Egypt. Those guys, 3 of them are playing for international teams, Chelsea, Manchester United, EC Roma, and those guys are very proud Egyptians. They're very proud young people who really grow within their comfort zone to become great citizens. And PepsiCo was the company behind all that, with the joint venture that we've done with both ministers over time to really develop that program and make something out of it that serve the country, make a loyal citizens, and also make PepsiCo proud of making a change to the community in Egypt. The third one, which I personally putting my heart into it, is the seeds program, which is Egypt is a great agriculture community. That was in the past, that was one of the main income drivers for the country 30, 40 years ago. However, it faded by time. And we thought that while we depend on potato in one of our main ingredients for success and for our products, we said that we import almost 100% of our seeds from outside, from Europe or from the Far East as well. And we said that cannot be something that we leave it happening for the rest of our lives. So we came up with a program sponsored by PepsiCo, is how to develop our local seeds program in Egypt. And that basically came as a great initiative. This year, we've grew 60% of the potato that we are using for our products are from a local seeds. Not only that, but we taught the growers that deals with us, and those are 40,000 to 50,000 growers that provide us with potato crops in a different time of the year. And mainly, we taught them how to really come up with a better way of growing potato, how they can come up with a better quality of crops, how can they use less water in growing those potatoes, and how they can really make sure that they end up with a better productivity, so it gives them a better structure for business model. The objective of that program not is to compete with other seeds importers, but is to make a differentiation for our potato quality versus the other competitors in the market, and of course is how to develop that model to make Egypt one of the exporters for local seeds in the future. This might take 10, 15 years. However, that's the great thing about sustainability, is that and the great difference between sustainability, and I would agree with everyone says that sustainability is very different than the CSR, because CSR, it's a bit of money paid here and there. It has an impact yes, but it doesn't really give you the great sustainability over a longer time of your strategy. We will not stop there. We'll continue to work on those initiatives in the future. However, that was a small detail about what we are trying to do in Egypt as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tamer. And then same question to Kip.
Thank you, Alison. So I'm Kip Cleverley. I'm the Vice President of Global Sustainability for International Flavors and Fragrances. We're a leading innovator of sensory experiences, that's both scent and taste, that move the world. 125-year-old company. We're in 40 or more different countries, and we're a supplier of those flavors and fragrances to companies like PepsiCo. So just a little bit about the SDGs, maybe my role. I'm probably the only one here who is a sustainability person. That's what I do all the time. I've been doing it for 20 years, I guess, before they called it sustainability. But my job, my role is to drive sustainable development, and we define that very clearly for our organization, throughout my organization, and then to partner with our suppliers as well as our customers to drive it throughout the supply chain. I'm part of the operating committee of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, founder of the National Resources Stewardship Council in New York. Together for Sustainability. And the one thing I have to say is we have real commitment from the top. Our CEO, Andreas Fibbig, is an executive committee member of the World Business Council. So SDGs have really been embedded in what we do. I'm going to change your question just a little bit. And you said, how do we develop our strategy? I would answer that differently and say, how do SDGs are embedded in our business strategy and in our sustainability strategy? So a key enabler of our business strategy, of our 2020 vision, is creating a sustainable future. So I own that for the corporation. Within that strategy, we focused on it. It's a very good timing, I think, because we rolled out our new strategy last year. We looked to some of the future of what is in sustainability. So the circular economy came up first, circular design, as well as the SDGs. So as we developed that strategy, we considered both of those forces and say, well, how do we embed that in what we believe is the future of sustainability? As you know, there are many SDGs, so there's 17. And if you start to break down those into the separate ones, there's like 130 different areas. You say, wow, you know, that could be a real challenge in order to be able to, which ones should we, or most material to IFF and then to society and to the company. So what we did was we worked with the World Business Council on a tool called the SDG Compass. And basically it was a tool that said, let's look at the materiality of your company. Let's look at where you want to go, and then let's try to map those to the SDG. We were actually the first company to pilot it. And I think we gained from it and they gained from it because it came out with a couple of clear areas where we could have the most impact in the world based on a company that has flavors and fragrances. Based on that analysis, there were a few, probably more than we wanted to, but then we started to pare those down. 2, which was zero hunger, 3, good health, 5, gender equality, 6, clean water, 13, climate action. And as a supplier of raw materials, we said, you know, we have a really unique opportunity to work all the way back in the supply chain with farmers. So when you start to look at an SDG, how do we have a positive impact in the world, which is part of our sustainability strategy? And I'm just going to share one example with you. So vetiver is a root that comes from, it really grows the best in the south of Haiti. As you know, the south of Haiti is very impoverished. So, but that's the best place to get vetiver. So we partnered with a number of NGOs, Heifer International, Oxfam, as well as one of our customers, Unilever, to see how can we enhance the lives of those farmers within the supply chain. So I personally went to Haiti. I met with the farmers and basically said, you know, I'm from New York City. What do you need? And the first thing they said was water. You know, the kids have to walk 2 hours to go just to get some water. So we said, could we put a well in? So we put a well in. That was the first piece. But the second part of it was, so that's the SDG around clean water, number 6. The second part of it was, what else do you need? And they said, you know, in between crops, you know, every 18 months you have a new crop of vetiver. In between there, and we don't have any income. So income diversification was an area that we said, okay, how do we, and income diversification really relates to food security. So how do you every day have income, which at the end of the day buys food? So a very unique model that we worked with Heifer International, their CEO, Pierre Ferraro, actually went with us and said, you know, we have a model that's been used in the past. Maybe we could use it here. And it was very simple. You know, you think about these things and how hard is this? It was very simple. So we gave each of the farmer families 2 chickens, 2 goats, and 2 turkeys. Why would you give a person who wanted food every day 2 goats?
Milk.
You treat a goat right, and he'll give you a gallon of milk a day, right? Chickens, eggs. Then teach those farmers how to care for them. Work with them from a veterinary service standpoint. And when we started to look at this, we said, you know, this model is fantastic because it's kind of like, don't give a man a fish, but teach a man to fish. And it was one of those areas that we said, wow, when you start to look at the SDGs, this really kind of hits home with things like zero hunger. The other part about it, which was number 5, which was gender equality, is that typically the men, farming vetiver, it's a kind of a man's job. It's a heavy-duty job. And the women sometimes get left out of that. So what we did was we specifically targeted the women and the children to take care of this small farm. And what it did was, from a gender equality standpoint, it lifts them up within the system because now they're providing value. They're caring for those animals every day. It's providing food every day. So their gender equality piece, and we call it women's empowerment within our strategy, really kind of built up the second part of it. I could tell you about some of the other pieces of it, but what was most important, and this is what, when I first came and back to our board and to our CEO and said, you know, we want to do this. And, you know, always the question is, probably from the CFO, okay, 1, how much does it cost? And 2, you know, from a business standpoint, what does it do for us? Well, for us, it's really about having a resilient supply chain, because vetiver is a product that more companies want more and more of, and a lot of farmers don't want to become vetiver farmers. Why? Because it's a pretty tough life. But when you start to put in some of these areas where you get food every day, you're improving your income, then those farmers want to be IFF farmers. They want to be IFF farmers. We have a better resilient supply chain, and then we provide a flavor to, say, PepsiCo. It drives all the way through there, and PepsiCo sees value in that as well. So I just wanted to kind of relate the SDGs to doing good, to transformational change, and then how, from a business standpoint, you can really bring that to the top line.
Fantastic. I have so many questions for all of you. I'm going to do one more round and then open it up to the floor, because I'm sure many people in the audience have many questions as well. Gary, I'd like to go back to your initial framing of how you think about the SDGs, and particularly what you said about shared value, which you defined as commercial initiatives pushed because of societal need. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, part of the thinking around shared value is that, you know, you should only address societal needs when they're also commercially interesting for you. But you also very explicitly said you saw a role for philanthropy, a role for CSR, and a role for policy advocacy. So my question is, how do you decide which is which? Do you start with shared value? Do you start with strategy? And maybe some guidance to anyone in the audience that's wondering, where do I start?
Well, the first thing I would say is what you decide to do is based on the characteristics of the problem you're trying to solve. And what distinguishes shared value, which is a newer concept relative to the other 3, is the ability to get to full scale. If you're speaking about philanthropy, companies can give away some percentage, usually not a huge percentage, of what they do in cash or in goods. CSR, I think, can be very important for cultivating commercial opportunity for the future, because you build relationships that can have an impact on your access to markets. But again, it's not going to be everything the company does. Advocacy and policy is really more a matter of alignment, and what distinguishes what we try to do from what I think most companies do in policy. A lot of companies advocate for policies that benefit them specifically, sometimes at the odds of society. And what we're trying to do is find that alignment between what is conducive to our success, but is in the public interest. And I can give many examples where we've been engaged in changing national laws, international guidelines, including things I've been personally involved in. But now coming back to shared value, it's the most challenging one, because I think there's 2 paradigms I think that have to be overcome. One is the paradigm that working on societal needs is not good for business. Whereas if you just apply common sense and think about truly successful entrepreneurs throughout history, what did they do? They found a need and they solved a need. What did pharmaceutical companies do in the early days? They developed drugs. You can take any entrepreneurial initiative and say, you know, in some form, if it was benefiting society, it was shared value creation, yet people who run businesses think that it works to their disadvantage. It takes their time and attention away from the bottom line. Well, companies that do good for society, that have sustainable governance, that have sustainable environmental practices, they're going to be sustainable themselves. So that paradigm has to be overcome. The second one is the paradigm that companies are somehow not progressive. I'll argue that today, multinational companies in particular, because of the guidelines that they need to adhere to in terms of governance, in terms of gender equality, look at the policies on equality in company. They're more advanced than governments. So we have to be able to act on that progressiveness. Now, to answer your question specifically, how do we balance this? Things tend to naturally fall into place, and they're not mutually exclusive. There are areas, like, let me give one example, and I'll finish quickly. Childhood immunization. The expanded program in immunization of children is probably the most successful public health initiative in history. In the 1970s, about 15% of children globally were immunized against common childhood diseases. Today, it's about 85%. We engaged in a number of ways in that. One of the factors, by the late 80s, it was clear that disease was being spread in mass immunization programs because the devices used to immunize children were being reused. That was a problem that begged for a solution. So on the shared value creation side, we created a very low-cost device that locked after a single use for immunization. It's called an auto-disable syringe. Between 2000 and now, about 6 billion of those devices have been supplied, entirely wiping out that category of disease spread, primarily hepatitis, but also HIV. That was shared value creation. We engaged in CSR because we went out into the field and helped train vaccinators on how to properly vaccinate children. And we engaged in philanthropy because we initiated with UNICEF an initiative to eliminate maternal and neonatal tetanus, which is now down by about 70%. We became a partner in the measles initiative, which was down 78%, 93% in sub-Saharan Africa. And we're engaging in the final eradication of polio. So and we worked on policy in that regard as well, because we helped formulate policies, particularly in India, that would complement the transition from reusable devices that spread disease to auto-disable. There's all four around a single area. So it really comes down to what's going to be most effective. And I really, really would advocate strongly to say philanthropy should not go away, because much of what we learned to do in shared value creation and CSR was an outcome of us starting in philanthropy and people kind of getting infected with doing good. This is one of the other secrets. People think in their career, whatever it may be, they get to the highest level, they publish the most, they get the most academic credit, or they make the most money. That's what leads to career fulfillment. You know what leads mostly to career fulfillment? Having the knowledge that you've done good in the world and you've helped others. I know that sounds very philosophical, but people look for purpose in their careers, and they do so in the business sector as well as in other sectors, but sometimes it's not naturally brought out as much. But purpose-driven companies are more successful. There's data showing that. I have the privilege, being a 120-year-old company that's very purpose-driven, and it's enabled this activity to be pursued more effectively.
Fantastic, really fantastic, fascinating remarks. I'd like to sort of turn to Tamer and see what you think about this point just made about the intersection between philanthropy and business needs. You described 3 programs, 2 of which sounded more philanthropic, and the first was interesting because you said it was 10 years old, so predates the SDGs. And then the third, which was much more about supply chain sustainability and commercial need, but also the needs of Egypt as a country and the needs of your suppliers. So can you talk a little bit about this question? Gary's just described his approach, how you balance your commercial and philanthropic goals, and then also how you support Egypt as a country and its goals.
Very good. I think from creating a total supply chain network, I think the partnership between PepsiCo and IFF, as Kip just said, is one demonstration of matching objectives and matching strategies as well, because such a company like PepsiCo, when it has its own developmental and sustainability projects, and then find a matching supplier that really works on the same thing and really take it a couple of steps ahead, like Kip mentioned in his example, that would be a great demonstration of how you combine the business strategy, the supplier selection, also the fact of the due diligence that you do when you really pick your business strategy partnership as well. That one side of the story. The second side of the story is the portfolio transformation. I see it as one very close example to what Gary have mentioned, because the partnership that we have made in Egypt, which is basically the business joint venture to take our portfolio out of our comfort zone, being a top manufacturer for beverage and food company to the dairy business was a great move in Egypt, for example, because that really delivers the second day on your sustainable goals, which basically making your portfolio healthier. And we went for a great company, which is Al Marai, a great operator in the Gulf area, who knows that business very well, who had a great platform on delivering on a healthier proposition to consumer. And we really said we were not going to be the bigger partner in that piece of business, but that came on the expense of our size and our market share on food and beverage, and we did not say that we have to be the big player and we have to be the decision maker. We made a compromise coming into Egypt and being number 2 or 3, but we wanted to create a platform and we wanted to deliver on the promise that we gave to the consumer over years in Egypt, that we will do our best to transform our portfolio. So as we focus on the profit generator for us in that region, which basically the food and beverage, we went for much less profit contributor, a category that cannot compete with the food and beverage in terms of profitability and revenue and turnover. And we said this is the future of our company in that region. The population of Egypt and similar countries in the region are becoming younger and younger every day. So you cannot talk to one age group. You have to really get ready for the future. And we made the call to make less money, but deliver on our promise. And we're really putting a lot of investment in that business. We're making sure that we're really moving faster in terms of setting a strategy that gives us a higher return on that business, but also grow that portfolio as equal as the other 2 companies that we're operating with in Egypt. And guess what? In 3 years, we became number 1 in juice. In 3 years, we became the 2nd player in yogurt. In 3 years, we became number 2 in milk as well. So that is a great example for me personally how the company can put a strategy that can deliver on the sustainability, the portfolio transformation, take into consideration the acceleration of business model and the growth, but also accept that you will make less money in the sake of really delivering on the promise for the future.
Thank you very much. And then finally to Kip, if you don't mind, a couple of questions. What you said was so interesting. First of all, I wanted to pick up on this point about looking to the future. And you described your, I think you called it the Sustainable Future Strategy. So how important is it to take a long-term perspective if you're going to succeed here is question number 1. And then 2, you have such an interesting perspective because you are in the supply chain. So you talked about working with Unilever and then obviously this work you did in Haiti. You made this stakeholder engagement and communication and cross-supply chain collaboration sound easy. I'm sure it isn't, but what's your advice to, for how companies can look at collaboration across the supply chain?
Good questions. So maybe I'll start off with the long-term one. When we were doing, I've been with IFF for 6 years, and before that with a CPG company, Benjamin Moore Paints, before that other CPGs and pharmaceuticals, and I had to look at both sides of it, right? So if you're on one side and you're the customer-facing company, or if you're the supplier to the customer-facing company, you have to kind of think in both of those realms. We've done a lot of the things that everyone else has done. So we have goals around wastewater and energy. We were there at the Climate Paris Agreement. We're a CDP A member, EcoVadis Gold. Go through all those and check them all off. But when we went through our new strategy, we said, okay, that's all great, but what's next? What's the future? How do you look into that? So we partnered with customers and with futurists and said, where do we need to go? And it was, again, very simple, right? If there's going to be 10 billion people on the planet, there's not enough natural resources to do what we're doing today the way that we do it today. So what's the solution to that? Where do you get it? And there's the business opportunity. So the business opportunity is that there's an issue that you would need 5 worlds to do what we're doing today in 2050. What's the business opportunity? What we saw and what we found was the circular design and circular economy. So basically, if you're going to design something, and that's what we do, we design molecules, we design flavors for companies, Pepsi, how do you design that in a way that maximizes the resourcefulness? How with zero waste? And we looked to cradle to cradle. Bill McDonough was one of the people who helped with our strategy and really said, how do we design both of our products with the cradle to cradle idea? I'm happy to say that we were the first company in the world to create a cradle to cradle certified fragrance at the gold level, which I think was really future thinking. But we also learned a lot during that experience. So what you learn is it's not that easy. And what you learn is I need to do things differently when I start to think about how to design something for a supply chain. And I'll bring that right into the collaboration space. A lot of what we bring to the table as a supplier, and I always expect this from a CPG company, is innovation. So when we come up with a new ingredient, it's part of our job to be able to say to the end user and to the company, here's some new innovation that can help with your sustainable development goals. An example would be if the sustainable development goal is around health and nutrition. How can we make those products better, healthier from a nutrition standpoint? Is it less salt? Is it less fat? Is it less sugar? Is it healthy for me products? Is it having clean labels on those? What about the resources that go into that? How do I look back in my supply chain and make sure that I'm maximizing what those resources are in order to have that end product? So really it was a transformation for us. The collaboration, right, in 2 minutes it's easy to say that it's easy to collaborate. It's not. That initiative took years to get off the ground. It takes years to be able to work through and find out what is the exact right one. But my message would be you have to start. It all starts with a good conversation at a meeting. It all starts with, hey, we have a problem. And then, again, our job from a business standpoint is to deliver innovation that help with the Sustainable Development Goals, but also drive our business.
Sorry about that. We started a little late. I was just clarifying how much time we had left. We do have time, I'm told, for a couple of questions. I don't want to destroy everybody's coffee break, but if anyone has anything they would like to ask any of our panelists, I am happy to take. Maybe I'll take all these, and then we'll see who wants to answer what.
Push and wait till it turns red.
All right. So my name is Dina Sharif. I'm a founder of a company called Ahead of the Curve in Egypt, which is one of the leading companies working on impact entrepreneurship and responsible business practice across the region. So I enjoyed all of your remarks immensely, but my feeling is that we're still stuck in this paradigm of responsible, sustainable business as opposed to looking at each sustainable development goal as a real business opportunity. So I'm wondering, as companies, I think you all have sustainability strategies and you have ways to say how your companies are extremely responsible and are innovating around these responsible business and sustainable business practices. But I'm curious to know whether you look at each of these goals and say, where's the business opportunity? How can we create a new product or innovation that can be scaled to work towards a sustainable development goal? That's my first question. My second question is also when it comes to reporting back, I think that we're still stuck on reporting against the same kind of responsible business sustainability principles. And I'm also curious to know, as companies, are you thinking about how your business strategy, your core business strategy, not your sustainability strategy, is really looking into contributing to each of the sustainable development goals? And my last question is, in terms of supply chain, I think the most amazing work is happening amongst new businesses that are really creating business models around major problems in society, kind of, Gary, along the lines that you've said. I think there are a lot of entrepreneurs, very young ones, specifically in the Middle East, where we see a rising trend of these impact-driven entrepreneurs who are really contributing to SDGs by finding solutions and commercializing them and scaling them. but yet I don't see very large companies looking at them in terms of partnership or acquiring them or investing in them to help serve those SDG goals.
Great, thank you. We had a few more questions over here. Just one, if you wouldn't mind each.
All the countries where Canada, USA, UNICEF, and your company works for?
No, there's Africa, Asia, the Caribbean, and Central America. It started in Africa, and I used to be able to name every country, but once it got past 8, I couldn't. But I can name, most of the countries. It's pretty global, but not yet in some other areas. Sorry for answering, but
Yes, Seth.
it's quick.
Thank you. Thank you for organizing this event. And my name is Marcio Viegas from Sustainable. I'm the founder and managing director of this new startup. We're born basically together with the SDGs, and we're now very focused on the SDGs and developing e-learning around the SDGs and so on for companies. My question is thanks for the examples. My question is about priorities. So the three company people, how do you define your priorities? Because we have found through our research that even at companies where the CEO is committed, there is a gap between that commitment and, for instance, the middle managers. I mean, operations managers, they're focused on production. They're not focused on sustainability and butterflies. So how to get those middle managers involved if there is a need for that? And how do you define your priorities? Do you go before you go to the supply chain and partnership with the cities and NGOs and so on? Do you try to convince them first? So that's the first question. The second question is about reporting. Oh, okay.
And one more question, please, and then I'll give everybody a few minutes.
Okay, so my question is, because I had sustainability in the region, and one of the things that I loved Paloma was saying is that we need to have an online course for companies to understand how they can bring home SDGs. My challenge is also, we're coming from a very struggling environment where there are wars in Libya in certain part, and for me, one of the things that would really make a difference is also having the government trickling down these schemes to us. So how can we make it rewarding? We all agree that SDGs are value creation goals, but how can you also empower these governments to help us, do a better job into reporting and actually adopting these goals? So UAE have just announced a new law. It's called the CSR Passport Reward Scheme, in which they provide business opportunities to people who actually adopt SDGs. How can you help us get MENA countries and government also, empowering us and giving us more schemes and opportunities as Dina's was recommending?
Great, thank you for all those questions. I will let the panelists answer all or any, but please be brief. Kip, something on business, something on the middle management challenge, something on engaging with government.
I'll start off with the priority one, because I think that's one that I'm most familiar with. We have a very, very clear process of how we look at sustainability priorities. And a lot of what we're looking at is first, what is the ecological or social impact, and we measure that. And then second, what is the ROI or business value, and that can be somewhat intangible. And literally, we have a matrix that looks at them and says, we have all these ideas, all these different areas, which ones are we going to fund? Because just like any other initiative, and that's the way you have to really attack it, is you fund the ones that you believe have the most impact and have the best for the company. And then it's very easy for me to sell those, because those are the ones that are the best ones out of all the ideas. From a middle manager and driving it through the organization, it really comes down to how do you enable each one of the either business units and or those managers to see value in it. And they don't have to do everything. That's what I always say. You don't have to know everything. You don't really even have to know the SDGs. What you need to know is, within your job, these are the things that you need to do to contribute to make sure that IFF is the company that we want to be. And that could, again, that could be very specific to them, or it could be very broad depending on their role. And the last part about the government question, I'm a true believer that it is not government that started sustainability. that it is not government that could ever end or affect sustainability, that it really needs to be up to business that drive it. I mean, this is what the World Business Council is all about, is that business has to drive sustainability. And we have to drive sustainability because we know it's good for our company, it's good for the planet, it's good for people, and at the end of the day, that's the purpose of a company, is how do we make the world a little bit better, and of course, and how do we make a profit doing that? So that's my quick answer.
I'll pick the easy one. I think you have a great point about how you really can make sure that those strategies are cascaded down within the organization, especially when it's a global player with a lot of population. And I will tell you what we're trying to do. I think we're not there yet in the total engagement of the total system on developing and acting on those responsibilities and also objectives. However, a couple of days ago, we had a town hall for all the top 500 managers in our business unit, and we made the point to have 20 minutes talking about our sustainability objectives. We're putting a video to show people the progress of the major projects that we're working on, and we invited the United Nations representation in Cairo with the NGOs that they help us deliver on the Tumuh program that I told you about in the beginning, in order to let the people feel how can they get engaged into that sustainability projects. Of course, we make it a point that we review the progress of the sustainability project, something like the SEEDS program, something like Dawri al-Madaris, which is the school leagues, into our business quarter reviews within the business environment in Egypt, and of course with the region leadership as well, in order to create the habit of talking about sustainability and making sure that someone is doing something about it, and also make that conversation and dialogue with the middle management as well. So that doesn't mean that we do our best. We still need to do better. The second thing that I was personally working on is working with the Minister of Investment on putting something on the new investment law that impose on companies that new players coming to the country, that they have to play a role into sustainability project that can serve the communities. And this is a work that has been taken with, and the new investment law reflected part of that as well.
A few final remarks.
Yeah, I'm going to come back to your questions. I thought they were excellent. You're right. We emphasize things that seem to be more on the social than the business opportunity side. But I could assure you, some of the biggest opportunities we've had have been areas where we've been responding to social needs. They predated the SDGs. I'll give a quick example. Our initiatives to protect health workers from HIV transmission due to injuries, occupational injuries, which started in the late 80s, became the single largest source of growth for the company, over $3 billion of revenues driven by the SDG, driven by a social issue. Areas like medication areas, antimicrobial resistance, genomics, all these. And we're also, you mentioned about entrepreneurs, we're working with some brilliant startups that have come up with things we couldn't possibly come up with to partner, particularly in the area of antimicrobial resistance. And on reporting, we've done something pretty unique. We actually, every 5 years or so, present to our shareholders and analysts, and we put the SDGs as the second topic on the agenda after the CEO, before the CFO, before the business leaders, to show that alignment. So that's one of the ways we engage in reporting.
Thank you very much to our panelists. I think we have to move on.